Former chair of Paramount Global, Shari Redstone, is sounding off on why she decided to sell the CBS parent company. Redstone told the New York Times she wanted out after October 7th, and she says, "I wanted to support Israel and address issues around anti-Semitism and racism." Now, as a reminder, Paramount's $8 billion sale to Skydance Media closed earlier this year.
Now, Redstone also addressed the elephant in the room, settling President Trump's lawsuit with CBS over a 60-minute interview with his Democratic opponent, then Vice President Kamala Harris. She says she hoped the suit would root out anti-Israel bias at the network, saying, quote, "Part of me thought maybe Trump could accomplish what I never got done." Redstone's move sparked widespread outrage from CBS employees and the public over the settlement. And it seems some are still not happy with her, like journalist Glenn Greenwald, who writes, quote, "Shari Redstone, owner of Paramount and CBS, said that after October 7th, she no longer cared about journalism, only activism for Israel. Thus, 60 Minutes lost its editorial independence for the first time in its history after a story about suffering in Gaza." Quote, "She now is selling Paramount to an even more pro-Israel Ellison family, which intends to put Bari Weiss in some key position of influence over CBS News."
Yeah, this was quite the disclosure.
I was surprised that she did this.
So she said that
it was like you could have just skated off into the sunset. People are going to get over this when the next big headline comes out.
I mean, I don't care about the sale. You know, I've said that I don't think the government should have power over to prevent large corporate mergers because I'm a libertarian and I don't think it's any of the government's business if companies merge. But this is a weird. She thinks there's too much anti-Semitism. If I worked at the network and the boss said that, I'd be like, "What are you talking about?" And then this starts to just get into, like, well, is all criticism of Israel being chalked up to anti-Semitism? I think there is real anti-Semitism out there, absolutely. I think it exists online. I see it on social media. I see it on university campuses. I'm absolutely against it. I think it's appalling. I think it's very bad. I think it is an aspect of the far right and the far left are tainted by it. But I also think people who crusade against anti-Semitism occasionally make more than occasionally lapse into saying any criticism of what Israel's government is doing right now is the same thing as anti-Semitism, and this is very much in that same vein here.
In a lot of ways, I'm open to criticism about the media landscape and how it has people that do have thoughts and they get interjected into stories sometimes, but for the most part, there are amazing journalists that do a good job being objective. I think that they work best, these organizations, whether they're written articles or whether they're complete news organizations, when the owners of them don't try to dictate the news, because then that's no longer even trying to be news. Like, of course, there are going to be errors in news stories where you have to have corrections or guests on that may go one way or the other. But the owner, like the owner of Nexstar, or the owner, like the owner of any independent company or any broad conglomerate, should not come down and say, "Here's my perspective." It should be what has been discussed when you start with, because every national news story is really a local news story first. So what are the people on the ground saying? What have experts that have researched in this field tell you? What have people who've studied this said about what history tells us about these things? And so that's kind of where I would love to get our information from, especially when you have CBS News that's been running itself or 60 Minutes independently without any corporate oversight. There really is this blurred line that happens where people's feelings at any time can just be kind of a wave over the newsroom. And we saw that even with the Washington Post changing ownership. A lot of people were like, well, how does this change the newspaper? And in your perspective, it changed it because it became maybe just more balanced and not left-leaning. However, some people are criticizing that and saying that, your perspective overall is just put out there. And he kind of sent a message like, if you want to quit, then quit if this doesn't work for you. And so that's kind of the position that people are in, but you still want to read the Washington Post and know that you get news.
The Washington Post was very straightforward about it. Jeff Bezos said, "Hey, I own this paper. He's owned it for forever. My views are free speech and civil liberties and free markets," which is basically what Robby Soave's beliefs are. So, maybe I'm biased on this. And he said, "That's what I want the paper to do. And if you don't like that, that's perfectly fine.
The door's that way.
Should not work here anymore, but this is what we're doing. I'd like everyone to get on board with it. If you're not on board, this isn't the company for you." It was very, there was nothing underhanded about it. He just said, "This is what I want the paper to do."
And I think in Shari's instance, she was privately agreeing. She was calling like hosts that maybe had a stance, like Ta-Nehisi Coates was on CBS News. And I remember this interview blew up because he just had spent, I think, maybe like almost a year in Gaza and said what he saw. Even this is before he knew that it was going to be this full-fledged.
That was the one where, what's to say, Tony DeCoppel challenged him.
Yes, and it was and it was kind of, and so she felt like even that interview was anti-Israel because of the way that, the news organization kind of, the response to it.
And actually, some people thought it was, I think Ta-Nehisi Coates was fine with it, but he got challenged by Tony DeCoppel on his perspective, and it was kind of uncomfortable. But to me, that was a perfectly, maybe it wasn't breezy enough for whatever the morning program is, but it was certainly, the anti-Israel perspective was challenged by the host. So if you think even that was too much criticism of Israel, I don't,
maybe
get out of the news business then. Honestly, if that's your perspective, don't own this company anymore.
And after all the years of ownership of CBS, it's so interesting that, and I know for everyone it's different. Like some issue may hit closer to home for me than it does for you. So, but it's just like out of all the different things that have happened in the news over her family's tenure of owning CBS and Paramount, it's just like the foot was down. It's like no more, when there needed to be some nuance about how to discuss this, I think across the board, people were kind of hesitant on what to say, how to say it, what was accurate, what the numbers were of the real information. Could we believe what Hamas leadership told us and was reporting? Could we listen to everything Netanyahu was saying? And I think it created a little bit of chaos temporarily. But if she would have just saw it through the test of time, we're having the conversations that I think needed to be had throughout this entire duration of
this is the problem you run into when you're trying to do news, not opinion, just the facts, balanced, that kind of vision for commentary that existed for so long that is ostensibly neutral and non-ideological and nonpartisan and not opinion. This is why that doesn't work. Because everyone actually does have a perspective, and trying to pretend that they don't puts you in these weird situations where you're pushing people to be more one way or the other, but still say, oh, but it's neutral, and it's, well, no, everyone has biases, everyone has perspective. You might as well just do the news from that perspective. And then you can hire people with different perspectives, like we do here on Rising. You have a different perspective than me, and we talk and we discuss and we argue about it. Sometimes you bring on guests who agree with you. I bring on guests that agree with me. You pitch a story that you like. You do your lens, I do my radar, different. Like, that's how we achieve balance. We don't achieve balance by sitting here and trying to pretend and convince people that we don't have any actual views of our own, and we're just giving you, and we're just delivering the news, because then we immediately clash over, well, when we read the script, how much is it weighted for, say we're doing Israel? How do we make it sound more hostile to Israel or less? Do we, describe the people being killed as Hamas affiliated or totally innocent? You're making all sorts of perspective-driven editorial choices, even in the course of trying to have a supposedly neutral. For what purpose? Why? Let's just say you can get the more pro-Israel perspective from me and the more unfriendly to Israel perspective from the other person, and let people make up their own minds. Then trying to do this ultimate deception that it's just perspective free. Well, I think that's the problem, and why this whole model is dying.
And even like with 60 Minutes, it's an interview show. It's a long show that gives people the breath to speak and answer the questions, right? So, or even with the morning show, it's an interview style show.
And I find 60 Minutes
where they don't have
reprehensible. But
okay, I disagree with that. We talked about that, but I think like some shows are set up and supposed to be leaning on journalism, where if you understand and have studied journalism, it's like, yeah, you can have your perspective and definitely write down those questions, but then also look to what other people are saying and make sure your questions make sense and fall in line to bring the balance. You and your co-host, or if you're by yourself in 60 Minutes case and you're asking a question to an interviewee one-on-one, make sure that you're asking a wide range and that your eyebrow is not raised to the sky when they give an answer. Like, this is all, like you said, unintentional or intentional biases that you have that are represented through the screen as soon as they cut away to you. So it's a longer conversation, but I'm surprised that Shari Redstone even agreed to do this long form interview when she said this situation was stressing her out so much. I probably would have just stepped away.
I hope she enjoys retirement.
Well, John Oliver goes after Maha. We'll get into that right after this. We'll be right back.